Conditional access helps users stay productive from anywhere while protecting organizations with a zero trust approach. In this video, we're going to learn how to create a conditional access policy from scratch. Hey everyone, I'm Travis and welcome back to the channel. This is the second part in a series focused on securing Microsoft Entra ID with multi-factor authentication and conditional access. In the previous video, we talked about why passwords alone just aren't enough to protect against modern identity-based attacks. We also walked through security defaults, which are baseline policies you can quickly enable in the tenant. They're a great starting point for enforcing MFA and improving your organization's security posture. If you haven't seen that video yet, the link is in the description below. In this video, we're going to take things further. We'll break down the limitations of security defaults, walk through the anatomy of a conditional access policy, and then jump into the Entra portal to build one from scratch. And we're going to do this using report-only mode so we can test everything safely before turning it on. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend or colleague. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to go deeper into Entra ID or Azure Virtual Desktop, check out my courses. The links are below. And a big shout out to my channel members. Your support is appreciated. All right, let's get into it. In the last video, we enabled security defaults to roll out MFA across the organization. And honestly, for smaller organizations or tenants that are just getting started, security defaults are a solid option. But here's the catch, they're intentionally simple. And because of that, they don't offer any real customizations. You can't exclude specific users or groups, you can't target individual cloud apps, and you can't adjust requirements based on things like location or device state. It's basically all or nothing. And as soon as your organization grows or your security requirements become more complex, which they almost always do, security defaults start to become a limitation instead of a solution, and conditional access policies become the better option. But before we move on, there are a couple things you need to know. Conditional access requires Microsoft Entra ID P1 or P2 licensing. That's included with Microsoft 365 Business Premium, E3 and E5, and other bundles. You can get it as a standalone version. There's also a trial license available in most tenants. Definitely check out your licensing before you start building a policy. Also, you can't run security defaults and conditional access policies at the same time. So before we create and enforce any conditional access policies, we'll need to disable security defaults. We'll walk through disabling security defaults in the demo. All right, let's break down how conditional access policies actually work. At its core, a conditional access policy follows a simple rule. If these conditions are met, then enforce these controls. Every single policy you build uses that same structure. And once you understand the three core building blocks, everything else will fall into place. The first building block is assignments. This defines who the policy applies to and what resources it affects. On the user side, you can target all users, specific users, groups, or even directory roles like global admin. And importantly, you can exclude users, something you just can't do with security defaults. On the resource side, you can apply policies to all cloud apps or get really specific targeting apps like Exchange Online or SharePoint. That flexibility lets you apply tighter controls where it matters most. The second building block is conditions, and this is where conditional access really becomes powerful. Conditions let you decide when a policy should apply. You can evaluate things like user sign-in risk, user location, device platform type, client apps, whether the device is compliant, or joined to Entra ID. Now for our first policy, we're going to keep things simple and not configure any conditions. That means the policy will apply universally, regardless of where the user is signing in from or what device they're using. We'll go deeper into conditions in a future video. The third building block is access controls. This defines what happens when the policy is triggered. You can allow access but require additional controls like multi-factor authentication, a compliant device, or specific authentication strength. Or you can block access altogether. For our first policy, we're going to keep it straightforward. We're going to grant access but require MFA. Now, before we enable anything, we need to talk about report-only mode. You should never create a conditional access policy and immediately turn it on. That's a great way to accidentally lock users out or even yourself. Report-only mode allows the policy to evaluate real sign-ins and show you exactly what would have happened without actually enforcing anything. So users aren't impacted at all, but you still get visibility into how the policy is applied. This is how we validate the configuration before going live. Every policy should start in report-only mode. Let it run long enough to gather meaningful sign-in data, review the results, and only switch it on once we know it's configured correctly. And conditional access changes can have a big impact. A misconfigured policy can leave your tenant exposed or lock everyone out. So if you're following along, I strongly recommend doing so in a test or lab environment before production. All right, let's jump into the portal to build our first policy. The first thing to do before building any conditional access policy is disable security defaults. Remember, the two cannot run at the same time. Go to Entra ID in the Azure portal and then Properties under Manage. Scroll to the bottom and select Manage Security Defaults. We're going to move this from enabled to disabled. Supply a reason. Choose My organization is planning to use conditional access. Remember, once we disable security defaults, we remove MFA protection, and it won't be required again until we create and enforce the conditional access policy. It's best to move through these steps quickly to shorten the gap in coverage. Next, click Save and confirm the change. Now that that's disabled, let's go to Conditional Access and create our first rule. From Entra ID, go to Security under Manage. Then open Conditional Access located under Protect and select Policies. Some organizations may have policies already added that were created by Microsoft. These match the security default policies. Basically, those policies are so important that Microsoft creates and enables them for the customer. For this example, let's create our new policy. Select New Policy. Give it a descriptive name. The number of conditional access policies will grow. Using a good naming standard will help identify policies if you need to go back and review or update them. This one will be called Require MFA for All Users. Next, we'll add the assignment. Select 0 users or agents selected under Assignments. From here, we can select None. That won't be applied to any user, all users, or we can select a user or group of users. Select All Users. We can also add exclusions if needed. We can exclude guest or external users. We can exclude by directory roles, or select users and groups. We won't enable exclusions for this example. Notice the note warning not to lock yourself out. We'll use report-only mode in this example to verify it's working correctly. Next, go to Target Resources. From here, we can select None, All Agent Resources, All Resources, or select specific resources. For this example, we'll select All Resources. We'll leave Network and Conditions as default and unconfigured for this example. However, this is where we could specify advanced conditions such as the user's location, the device platform, or the client app being used. Go to Access Control and select Zero Control Selected. This is where we define the control for the policy. We can block or grant access. With grant, we can specify one or more controls. Select Require Multi-Factor Authentication here. Notice on the bottom, if we select multiple controls, we can configure it to require all controls or just one of the selected controls. We'll leave it set to all controls. We only have one. Once we've selected Require MFA, click the Select button. Before we create the policy, verify it's set to report-only mode. This way we can verify the policy is working correctly before we enable it. The options we have are to turn it on, that would enforce the policy, or we could turn it off. That will keep the policy, but it won't be applied or logged. Also notice we're getting another warning. It's telling us we should exclude at least one administrator account. An upcoming video will cover emergency access accounts in more detail. Click Create to save the policy. Confirm that the policy appears in the Conditional Access Policy list with the Report Only badge. Next, we need to create some data for the logs. It's best to have multiple test accounts, but if you just have one, that should give enough information. You can sign into any Microsoft Cloud service. You could also simply go to My Sign-ins, located at aka.ms/mysign-ins. Pause here and sign in with a couple of different accounts. Once you've signed in a couple of times, come back to the video and we'll review the logs. Now that we have our conditional access policy in report-only mode and some sign-in activity, we can review the logs. From conditional access, open sign-in logs under monitoring. This may take a few seconds to open. We reviewed these logs in the last video. This time we'll focus on conditional access details. Let's open a log entry from one of the test accounts used to log in. In activity details, we'll go to conditional access. It shows not applicable because the policy is in report-only mode, so it isn't enforced yet. If we open the report-only details, we'll see more information about the assignment, conditions, and controls that would apply. Here we can see the assignments matched, the conditions weren't configured, and the required action would be MFA. We can repeat these steps for any one of our logins to see if and how conditional access will apply. These logs are helpful to review sign-ins that have taken place, but what if we want to test a user who hasn't signed in yet, like an admin account or an executive? In that case, we can use the What If tool. We'll go to Conditional Access, then Policies. At the top of the screen, select What If. From here, we'll fill out the required fields. We'll start by choosing Users as the identity type and adding a user. For Target, we'll set it as a cloud app and then choose an app. For this example, we'll use My Profile. This is a random selection just to demonstrate the What If tool. Next, we'll select the device type as Windows, then set the client app to browser. We can leave the rest blank, but it's helpful to notice these options, since they reflect the kind of conditions we can define in our policy. For example, we could create different policies for mobile devices and Windows clients. Those policies would apply to the user differently depending on the type of device they log in with. Once everything's filled in, we'll select What If at the bottom. And be sure to scroll down to see everything. The screen layout here isn't perfect, but it shows that the Require MFA for All Users policy would apply. It will also list any policies that wouldn't apply. None here because we only have one. Now that we've confirmed the policy is working as expected, we're ready to enable it. We'll go back to Policies and Conditional Access. Open the policy and choose View or Edit. And we'll change Enable Policy from Report Only to On. It's displaying a warning about locking ourselves out. This is because if we set up a conditional access policy that requires MFA and it applies to all users, and for whatever reason it doesn't work correctly, we could lock out all of our users, including the global admin. In this example, for a lab, I do recommend leaving Exclude Current User. It's a good idea to keep at least one excluded account as a backup. For now, we can leave the setting as is and exclude the account, or if you're really confident in your policy, you can change it. Once you're ready, click Save. That's it, the policy is now enforced. When a user signs in with an account that isn't excluded, they'll get prompted for MFA or asked to enroll if they haven't already set it up. That is how to disable security defaults, create a policy, review sign-in logs, use the What If tools, and enforce the policy. All right, let's wrap things up. In this video, we covered the limitations of security defaults and when it makes sense to move to conditional access. We broke down the three key components: assignments, conditions, and access controls, and how they work together to enforce zero trust policies. Then in the demo, we disabled security defaults, created a new conditional access policy that requires MFA for all users, tested it safely using report-only mode and the sign-in logs, reviewed the What If tool, and finally enabled the policy. In the next video, we'll build on this by blocking legacy authentication, restricting access by location, and setting up a proper break glass account. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.